Guarantee for Rozgar and Ajeevika Mission, Gramin, VB, G Ram Ji, Viksit Bharat, G Ram Ji, बिल 2025 को सभा में पूरा स्थापित करने की अनुमति दी जाए।
मैं नियम 72(1) के तहत इस विधेयक को पुनर्स्थापित करने पर अपनी सख्त आपत्ति दर्ज करना चाहती हूँ।
To remove the name Mahatma Gandhi is to strip the bill of its moral compass and its historical legitimacy, and then to have two languages in the title, just to make the acronym G Ram Ji, is not just a violation of Article 348 as pointed out in the previous discussion, but it also reminds me of a song, of a lyric from my childhood, sir. मेरे बचपन में ये गाते थे, देखो ये दीवानो ओ दीवानो ये काम मत करो, राम का नाम बदनाम मत करो।
बिना इस सदन की सलाह लिए इस तरह से जल्दी में विधायक को पास नहीं होना चाहिए।
जो देश हित में बिल पारित करना है वो तो हम पारित करके ही रहेंगे।
निर्णय हाँ वालों के पक्ष में हुआ, हाँ वालों के पक्ष में हुआ, अनुमति प्रदान की जाती है।
Honorable Minister Shivraj Chauhan ji, your name will be remembered. The minister who removed the father of the nation's name.
Hello and welcome. You're watching The Wire. I'm Sravasti Dasgupta. Amid widespread criticism and objections from opposition parties as well as rights-based activists, the union government on Tuesday introduced in the Lok Sabha the Viksit Bharat Guarantee for Rozgar and Ajeevika Mission, Gramin, which in short is called the VB-G Ramji Bill, which seeks to repeal the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, which was brought in by the UPA in 2005 and is the world's largest rural job guarantee scheme. Now, while questions have been raised about the change in the name of the bill, there are also several questions that are being asked that what lies behind these cosmetic changes and questions about federalism and the fiscal burden on states. So what really is behind this legislation? To discuss this, I'm being joined by economist Jean Drèze, who's going to help us unpack what this proposed legislation really means. Thank you so much, Professor Drèze, for joining us on The Wire.
Thank you for having me.
First off, I want to ask you that the government today went ahead and introduced the bill despite massive opposition from opposition parties, as we saw earlier. Now, while opposition parties are focusing on the change in the name of the bill, where Mahatma Gandhi's name is being removed, the problem is not just a cosmetic change in the bill, but rather it is about federalism, it's about the fiscal burden on the states, and changing the very nature of the right to work, which was a legal guarantee under the previous act. If you could break down for our viewers the deeper problems behind this legislation.
Yes, you are absolutely right. The issue is not so much renaming. Renaming is a red herring. Of course, the renaming is very silly. It's a bad idea. That's not the main point. The main point is that the act, the Employment Guarantee Act, is being repealed, as you have correctly stated. So the issue is not renaming, but repealing. Now, if you allow me, I would like to first say something briefly on behalf of NREGA Sangharsh Morcha. NREGA is the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, and NREGA Sangharsh Morcha is a coalition of many organizations working with NREGA workers. We had an online meeting last night with more than 150 participants. And let me say, based on that meeting, that we all in one voice reject this bill in toto. Here is the bill, the G Ramji bill. It should be junked and it should be thrown in the bin. And the reason for that is that, on the one hand, as you said, it repeals the NREGA under Section 37. So NREGA is history the moment this bill is adopted. And secondly, it replaces NREGA with a centrally sponsored scheme fully at the discretion of the central government. The central government has all the powers. It can set the wage, decide where the act comes into force, decide the financial allocations, everything. And it has no liability to anything. All the liabilities have been passed to the state governments. Liability to provide employment, liability to pay on time, liability to pay the unemployment allowance, liability to pay compensation if the wages are paid too late, and so on and so forth. The worst part of the discretion is what I would call the discretion clause, or if you like, more accurately, the switch-off clause. And what the switch-off clause basically says is that this act comes into force, or rather is applicable, wherever and whenever the central government decides. It says in so many words that the scheme is applicable in such rural areas as are notified by the central government from time to time. Now, this switch-off clause completely undermines the idea of work guarantee. It's like saying, I give you a work guarantee, but I don't guarantee that the guarantee will come into effect. It's a joke. And by the way, in 2004, when the MGNREGA first was tabled in Parliament, 21st December 2004, just before it was tabled in Parliament, the UPA government had also tried to introduce a switch-off clause. After the draft was prepared by the NEC and discussed by various ministries and the PMO and so on and so forth, just before it was tabled in Parliament, the UPA government also tried to introduce a switch-off clause. And you can understand that from the government's point of view. Obviously, it's safer to be able to switch the guarantee on and off when you like. But that undermines the whole idea of guarantee. So at that time also, we had opposed this, and it took a lot of protests and demonstrations from all sides for that clause to be removed. And then it was removed, and that's how MGNREGA became what it is, a real work guarantee. This bill is not a work guarantee. It puts in place a discretionary scheme at the whim and fancy of the central government. And that's why we reject it in toto. Sravasti, I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, yes. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Because you're using very strong words to say that you're rejecting this bill in toto, and you're saying that the central government, the switch-off clause is very important, but the government is trying to focus on the fact that it has increased the number of work days through this legislation from 100 to 125, and it is saying that this, therefore, it should be welcomed, because earlier the law was 100 days, now we have increased it to 125 days. Now, this increase in work days was also something that a parliamentary standing committee had mentioned. It had also mentioned a revision in wages. So should an increase in work days then be welcomed, as the government is saying that we should?
Okay. So, Sravasti, the government has very successfully used two red herrings in the last few days. One red herring is the renaming, and the other red herring is this 125 days, which it has used very successfully to create an impression that this bill is revamping NREGA rather than repealing it. It is repealing it, and 125 days, frankly, is neither here nor there. And let me explain why. Of course, we welcome this. There's nothing wrong with increasing the limit, the ceiling, if you like, from 100 to 125 days. We have always said that what is far more important than that is to increase the wage rates. But we're not opposing 125 days, obviously, and sometimes we have asked for it too. But the point is that, first of all, it doesn't make much difference because very few people get 100 days in the first place. So when the ceiling is not being met by the vast majority of workers, raising the ceiling by 25 days really doesn't make much difference. And secondly, and more importantly, when you're doing that along with curbing and restraining the funding, then you are actually hiding the fact that you are restricting the act rather than expanding it. And the restriction of funding is very serious. I mentioned the switch-off clause because it's the most objectionable part, but there are many other objectionable parts. And one of them is this switch from 100% funding of wages by the central government to 60-40. And in fact, it's not even 60-40. It's 60-40 up to what the bill calls the normative state-wise allocations. So the central government will have discretion to set so-called normative allocations state-wise, and then up to that, it will be 60-40. And beyond that, if the states want to provide more employment or have to provide more employment in response to demand, they will have to fund 100%. So the financial burden is passed to the state in a very significant manner. and many states will not be able to contribute their 40% or let alone 100% beyond the normative allocation. So that is going to curb employment very significantly, and this symbolic expansion from 100 to 135 does not compensate for that at all, and in fact it hides that restriction of the act.
Of course, you're saying this earlier. This, of course, comes in the back of the central government being in a tussle with several state governments. For instance, West Bengal, where the state government has been deprived of central government funds with regard to NREGA, and now that the Supreme Court and the Calcutta High Court have both asked the union government to release these funds, we have a law like this that has come, in which the entire burden, in a sense, is being placed on the state governments. So an assessment that is being made is that the bill reduces the legal right to work and makes the legal guarantee of the right to work into a simply centrally sponsored scheme where the center is making the rules, but it is the state which is bearing all the financial burden as well as the burden of putting out the scheme. And if there is any failure on part of the state government, then too the reins remain in the hands of the state. Is that a fair assessment in your opinion?
I think you're saying more or less what I've also said earlier in different words. It's not quite true that all the financial burden is on the states. The center will still contribute, but all the liabilities will be on the states. That's what I was trying to explain. I'm glad that you mentioned West Bengal, because the manner in which the central government has discontinued arbitrarily the entire scheme in West Bengal for more than 3 years is a very good illustration of how the discretionary powers that are being given to the central government under this bill could be misused. For 3 years, the central government has failed to explain what it is accusing the West Bengal government of. Even in the Lok Sabha, all it could say is that the West Bengal government is not following its instructions. That's all. So basically, it's political. Everyone understands it's political. So these discretionary powers, these vast discretionary powers that are being given to the central government under the bill are very likely to be misused, and that's another reason why we are opposing this.
The clause that is seeing some criticism is the fact that the bill says that for a period aggregating to 60 days in a financial year, covering the peak agricultural seasons of sowing and harvesting, during which works under this act shall not be undertaken, which means, to my understanding, that during peak agricultural season, this will not be in force. What impact would that have?
Right. I don't think this is the worst part of the bill. I am not in favor of it. I think it's an unnecessary complication, and again, it could be misused. One could make some arguments for it. I mean, it can help, for example, to diffuse the opposition of big farmers. There are some areas, like, for example, parts of Andhra Pradesh, where the big farmers have opposed this Employment Guarantee Act. And if you had a clause of this kind that discontinues the guarantee for a short period during the peak agricultural season, like sowing and harvesting, it would help to diffuse that opposition. So, you can make arguments for and against it. On the whole, I'm against it. But I don't think it's the worst part of the bill. I mean, this is a sideshow. Basically, in this bill, the central government is putting as many spanners in the wheel as possible. This is one of them. Another one is this requirement that the job cards will have to be renewed every 3 years. And not only that, but every 3 years, the workers will, for that purpose, have to give all sorts of information, including not only their name, address, age, gender, and so on and so forth, but of course also Aadhaar number and an insurance number, all kinds of things. So the way things go, and based on the experience that we have, this could create a lot of hassles for poor people and end up excluding workers who are otherwise entitled to work. So I'm not in favor of all these complications. I think the guarantee should be as simple and extensive as possible.
That with the bill now stating that the union government, as you were saying earlier, that the state-wise normative allocation for each financial year will be based on objective parameters as may be prescribed by the union government. Now, do you think these changes are likely to affect developed states like Kerala, Tamil Nadu, especially if the multidimensional poverty index is fixed as the parameter?
Criteria, I don't have much faith in the central government using objective criteria, and that's why I mentioned West Bengal. I mean, that's a clear case where they were not using objective criteria at all. The issue of distribution across states is a legitimate issue. You are right that some of the better off states very likely are going to get much reduced allocations. For example, Tamil Nadu, which is making very good use of NREGA and spending quite a lot of money, I think they're going to find a much reduced allocation. And for all we know, the act may not even be notified in most of these states, most of the areas of these states. And the poor states will suffer in a different way because they will not be able to contribute their 40%, let alone the 100% above the so-called normative allocation. So all the states are going to be in a difficult position. Some well-meaning economists are making an argument for these objective criteria because they feel that more of the money should go to the poorer states, and that right now too much money goes to the better off states, and that these so-called normative allocations could be used to correct that. I don't think this is going to happen. And I think that if you are really concerned about the poorer states not getting enough, what you should do is to raise the wage rates in those states. Then there will be much more demand and the money will flow there. And in any case, there is a strong case for that, because the fact that the wages are so low now so much lower than market wages, and on top of that, there are delays in payments and sometimes people are not paid at all. This has led to a huge discouragement effect and loss of interest on the part of the workers. And if the workers are not interested, this act cannot be saved. It cannot work unless the workers are interested. So for many reasons, including fairness, the wages should be raised in the poorer states, and that would be a much better way of ensuring that they make better use of the act than to impose caps on the richer states. That's not going to help the poorer states.
That in 2015, Modi had called NREGA a monumental failure. And over the years, over the last decade or so, we have seen that the budgetary allocations for NREGA have reduced. CAG audits have not taken place. Aadhaar-based payment systems that were introduced resulted in several hundreds and thousands of deletions of job cards, and which has created a setback to this first of its kind work guarantee program. In an essence, a lot of people have been saying that there was a concerted effort to bring down this scheme from the very beginning. But you have worked with people and on the scheme from the very beginning, and you have seen the impact that this has had. What was the fundamental shift that you saw that was a part of this act becoming a reality?
Big shifts is that the Modi government doesn't like NREGA. From the beginning, they have been hostile to it and they have tried to restrict one another. I forget that statement in Parliament that he made. I mean, that was unguarded comment or whatever, or report of. But more importantly, as soon as he came to power in 2014, the central government tried to restrict the act to specific districts. And they tried for the first time to introduce ceilings on financial allocations to the states. So from the word go, they were looking for ways of restraining the act. Now that they had to backtrack because of public pressure, later on they tried in other ways, and especially through centralization and technocracy. Please remember that the Employment Guarantee Act was meant to be an enabling act that would enable states to have their own employment guarantee scheme, not a national scheme. There was no intention of having a national scheme. But ever since Narendra Modi came to power, the act has become, or rather the scheme, has become more and more centralized, and the central government has controlled and micromanaged more and more things. And this bill goes further in that direction of giving even more powers to the central government. And also in continuing and reinforcing the trend of technocracy, everything being digitized and geotagging, Aadhaar-based payments, national mobile monitoring system, all kinds of complications, technologies that are not mature, not reliable, not appropriate, that people don't understand, and end up basically using NREGA workers as guinea pigs for new technologies that are not ready. And all this has done great harm to the Employment Guarantee Act. It has further discouraged the workers because, there are all these glitches and complications, and sometimes they are not paid at all. And when that happens, what they do, very sadly, is that instead of working by the rules, they collude with corrupt contractors who give them money on the dot in their hand in cash and fudge the records and siphon off NREGA money. And that's why corruption, contrary to government claims, has increased in the last 10 years. In fact, quite a lot in my experience, and not just my experience, the experience of many people who are working on the ground. So the failure that you referred to, the monumental failure, is the failure of the last 10 years, not the failure of NREGA. And today, this is the logical conclusion, that if you really are hostile to the act and you want to restrict and dismantle it, you end up repealing it. And that's what's happening today.
Ask you that there have been a lot of commentary on the fact that there has been a need to bring in reforms to the act itself, whether it's revising wage payments or making it suitable to inflation. What, in your opinion, should have been done instead of repealing the act as it's being done right now?
Revamping in this act. There's a symbolic pretense of revamping in the form of that extension for 1 days. I've already commented on that. If you look at the fine print of the act, there's nothing constructive. I mean, either it's negative things like these discretionary powers, or it's copy-paste from NREGA. The only constructive section I could find, the only thing that I would say, yes, I think this is a good thing, is the increase of the penalty clause from 1,000 rupees to 10,000 rupees. This is the clause that says that if somebody does not do their duty under the act, then they can be fined. Earlier it was 1,000 rupees, which is nothing. Now it's 10,000 rupees, which is still not much, but anyway. That's the only constructive provision that I could find. Otherwise, there is nothing constructive. If you wanted to do constructive things, you could have done constructive things. As I said, for example, you could raise the wages. I think that's long overdue. You could make sure that wages are paid on time. You could have compensation based not only, you see, the wages are paid in 2 stages, before and after the generation of the fund transfer order. Right now, the compensation is based only on the first stage, but the big delays are in the second stage, the delay between the issuing of a fund transfer order and the actual crediting of the workers' accounts. And that's often because money has run out, and so you cannot pay the workers. So the compensation should be paid based on the full delay of both stages together, not just the second stage. And very importantly, we need stronger grievance redressal mechanisms and action against corrupt people, corrupt middlemen who siphon off NREGA funds. Right now, it's very difficult to get any action taken against them. When corruption is exposed, action is typically taken against the small fry. The worksite supervisor or the Gram Rozgar Sevak at the village level, or at most the panchayat secretary, once in a while the panchayat officer at the block level. But the real crooks who are masterminding this behind the scenes, it's extremely rare for them to be punished. So we need much stronger provisions to go after them, and also the political will to do it. So there are a lot of things that can be done to improve this program and make it work. But I don't see anything in this bill that's going to help in that respect.
For joining us on The Wire, and to our viewers for watching.
Thank you very much.